Morning all. And thanks very much for joining. Even with the words financial advice in the title, it's good to see some people coming in and coming along to this. So I'm delighted to be able to release some latest research that was done by YouGov in June. So it's very, very hot off the press. So we held it back to release to you. So you are the very first people in the world, apart from me and my team, obviously, that are seeing this. So there's going to be some excerpts in the presentation, but if you want the full report, please visit the stand or download it from our website. It's fair to say if we looked back 10 to 15 years, financial advice wasn't that prevalent in many workforces, especially if you stepped outside of retirement and pensions. But as we all know, times have changed, and dramatically so in the last 4 years. Finances, personal finances, have suffered an onslaught. You can see some of the main culprits up there. We all know them. We don't necessarily want some of them pointed out to us again. But inflation, cost of living crisis, the pandemic, all of these really have brought many financial challenges to individuals. But it's more than that, because they've come one after another, right on top of one another, with no time for any respite or recovery. So we're now in 4 years of troubles at the end of that. And that's really come to bear. So people, even though some, inflation is down, we saw the numbers down, it takes a lot of time for people to recover from what's happened to them over the last 4 years. And also the other thing is financial well-being in itself has changed. So these days, compared to 15 years ago, individual employees have to make financial decisions from day one of their career, from their working life, and every single day thereafter, all the way through their career. It's not something that they can just coast until the end of their career on. They're having to make these decisions all the time. And what does this all mean, really? This all means that individuals, employees, need more support and more help throughout their career. So in another YouGov research piece that was done last July 2023, over 1,000 employees were asked, what are the most important workplace benefits to help you improve your financial well-being? And those you can see there are the top 3. So behind a pension and behind private medical insurance, financial advice was rated as the 3rd most important. Now, you can see there that is every single employee group. That is not just people approaching retirement or not just people entering the workplace with debt. It is every single employee group. And that's really interesting, isn't it? But, it really is that is the demand. We all know that the difficulty is how to match that need with the provision. And we're going to have a look at that in a minute. So what have providers done to try and respond to this increase in demand? So we've seen, for example, a number of existing providers who currently sit in the workplace adding things like financial well-being to their services. So traditional providers like a pension provider also saying we now deliver financial well-being. We've seen new providers entering the market, things like financial coaching, for example, things like workplace loans, for example, financial wellbeing platforms, fintech solutions. We've seen all of this come forward. So let's kind of have a look at exactly what that's doing to help employees. But if we look at those, and we'll see in a little bit, not many of those do actually offer financial advice. So whilst they may help with financial awareness, they're not offering that level of advice. These are just some examples. There are many, many occasions through life moments, if you like, that may cause individuals to say, I need more help. For some, it might just be education or awareness. For others, it might be guidance. And for others, it might be advice. But there's lots of instances where they may need that extra help. And thinking back to that provider market, thinking to the providers inside your organisations at the moment, for example, think about how many of those could respond to, for example, an employee finding the right mortgage, or someone looking for the right protection policy if they're worried about cover for ill health, or somebody who's dealing with care for an elderly relative and how they're going to fund their care costs. Very few providers inside the workplace are going to be able to match that need. So what does this latest research tell us? This latest research is showing the current position in the UK, and it's showing that, and some of you may be surprised at this, 63% of organisations offer financial advice in the workplace. Yes, if you scratch beneath the surface and look at that, the majority of that is around pensions, whether that's consolidating pensions, finding an annuity, looking at a possible transfer of a defined benefit pension, looking at retirement options, but most of that is around retirement and pensions. Only 12% of the provision offers what I would call the full range of financial advice, so helping someone find a mortgage, find protection, talk about pensions, look at funding, look at savings options, looking at investment solutions, looking at tax. So actually, going back to that headline figure, when you see 63%, if you're thinking of that full range to meet those employee needs, it really is only 12% that are doing that. And if we think back to those life moments, as I said, and those employee groups, and have a look at that sort of the advice mostly offered, it's very clear to see that it's unlikely that the current provisions are meeting most employee need. When we're looking at who's providing the current advice, you can see there's a one at the top called Financial Wellbeing Provider. That's a bit of a catch-all term, and we're going to look and dig a bit deeper into what that actually means. But you can see some of the culprits there. A financial advice firm, a panel of financial advisors, so where organisations perhaps don't want to recommend one particular firm, they provide a list of 3 or 5, and individual employees can then choose, for example. But if you go back to pension provider or benefits platform, again, they're likely to be focused on their core services as opposed to that full range. Now, I work in financial services, and everybody else that works in financial services are pretty clear on the differences between financial education, financial guidance, financial coaching, and financial advice. But for everyone else, it can be a bit confusing, we recognise that. And actually, there are some providers out there and some narratives that are quite happy for those lines to be a bit blurry. But it's really, really simple. The only providers that will provide financial advice are those that are regulated to do so, and they are financial advisors. They are regulated, they are governed, they are trained, and they are supervised to deliver the right type of advice for that particular client. Nobody else is. So anybody, literally, can deliver financial education, financial guidance, and financial coaching. Only qualified, practicing, and regulated advisors can deliver financial advice. So you can really kind of see there, I mean, I'm not going to go through the whole table. The only difference, the sort of two ends of the scale, really, financial education is providing information, best practice, models, tools, decision-making criteria. Financial advice is giving written, recommended individual advice. The two in the middle is guidance, where it takes the education and tries to show an individual how that education applies to their circumstances and shows them the options available to them. It's still down to the individual to either make a decision about which option is right and put that option into practice. And for all intents and purposes, just to sort of, again, clarify, what's the difference between financial guidance and financial coaching? Not much, nothing at all in its substance. However, a coaching relationship tends to be over a period of time, and so can provide that sort of checks and accountability, a bit like, you know, are you following the plan? Where are you up to on the plan? Have you done what you said you were going to do? And that's the only real difference between those two. In practice, the way these things work together is at an employee level. If those 3 levels of service are offered, the education, the guidance, and advice, that almost delivers employees with the best possible raft of support. And it also delivers the clearest and best employee experience. Most employers will not know what your employees are going through every day of the year. You won't know some of the things until they tell you. But if they know that that level of support exists and they can access it to the level they choose for their own circumstances at that point, that gives them everything they need under one house. And also, if you look at that, for most individuals, for most of those life moments, financial education is enough to take them and give them the guidance and the tools that they can go, okay, I can crack on and do some of this myself. For some people, they need that bit more help, that bit more narrowing down of those options, what's available to me. And for others, they do actually need help and walking through it and somebody else to do it for them or do it with them. But this is a very kind of efficient model. You'll see there, education for all doesn't mean that all will take advice or all will seek guidance. What naturally tends to happen is employees self-select as they go through that particular thing. So in looking at the latest research, we saw that 63% said they do provide some form of financial advice, even if it's not for all employees or for all particular types of advice. But for those that don't, you can see there are some that are going to introduce it in the next couple of years, and there are some that are absolutely vehement that it's not on their agenda at all. And for those that say it's not on their agenda at all, other than kind of resources, time, and budget, the usual culprits, they also still have this legacy position, which is they are worried about the risk of inappropriate advice being given to individual employees, then reflecting badly on them. But if we turn that kind of around, really, and say, well, if you were to look for a provider, what would be the top things that you were looking for? Obviously, price is a key feature, but consistency of quality, consistency of service level, and actually UK-wide coverage, so to give them that kind of demographic. If we look back at the UK market, and you can see the stats on the bottom there, just over 16,000 registered firms registered with the FCA in the UK. That was in December. So an individual employee trying to find the right advisor for them, if they're left to the mercies of their market, the risk of them finding someone who can actually service them properly at the right price with the right level of governance and structure in place is very, very high compared to something that has been through a proper selection and procurement process. And you can see there that of those 16,000 firms, a huge number are one-man bands. So the likelihood of them being able to provide that service cover and that UK-wide is very, very low. So coming back to the sort of provider types that you're going to find when you are either looking at your own organisation that's currently in place or you're looking for a new provider, you can see there the different providers. And the reason we sort of say core business, because as we all know, the core business is what they will focus on first and foremost, and anything they add on top of that is going to be ancillary to that. So it's going to be a bit of a sideshow to what their main core service is. And you can see there, financial wellbeing provider, what does that mean? We'll come back to that in just a second, because that's a bit of a catch-all term that can mean many different things. But you'll see there that really a financial advice firm is the only one that is guaranteed to provide you with advice on a range of advice. Pension providers will, absolutely, but it's likely to be focused again on pensions, pension consolidation, maybe pension transfers. Not all will have that, because that's a very specialist thing, and retirement advice. And when you're looking at a benefits provider, unless they have tied up with a financial advice firm, it's very unlikely that they themselves will have regulated financial advisors inside their firm. So you can see there, clarifying really the sort of expertise that is going to be in front of your employee population. Now, going back to who is a financial wellbeing provider, that's an unusual term because it is a catch-all. So good old Google, I just typed into Google, financial wellbeing provider in the UK, and that's the hit that came up a few weeks ago. And you'll see there, we've kind of highlighted core services and again, whether they provide financial advice there. And this is not making a commentary at all on the quality of the service they provide. This is just clarifying for you who will be providing financial advice and who won't. And you can see out of 10 there, only half, only 50% are going to be in a position to provide financial advice. And only 4 out of those 5 are able to give you that kind of consistency of advice, because one provider provides advisors through a freelance service, so anybody who decides to sign up on that particular day can be in the frame. So hopefully that gives you a bit of a snapshot, albeit at a point in time, of what the market's out there doing. But we're showing it really so that if you're in a position where you're either looking at what you've got inside your own organisation, looking at existing providers or looking for future providers, the sorts of questions that you need to ask so that you can put the provision you want in front of your employees. That's all I've got to say formally. So if you do need a copy of the full advice, both of them are on our stand, or please go to our website. And I think we've got some time for questions if there are any.
Yeah, thanks.
Thanks, Jeanette. There aren't actually any questions in the Slido. I don't know if anyone's got any in the audience. Oh, there's one here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that. It was really interesting. I'm just wondering if you have any research on the impact that giving financial advice has on employees, whether that's kind of competence levels or engagement levels, or just, generally making decisions that they feel more applicable to them?
Yeah, we absolutely do. And I think, going back to the research that was done last year, employees said this is the most important thing for them, and those that have taken the advice have found it valuable. The difficulty comes where they try to find advisors if an advisor isn't presented to them, if that makes sense. And the sort of sources they tend to look for, we all have these stories, don't we, of friend down the pub. But the most common sources people will go to are friends and family. If there's nothing recommended in the workplace, or if there's nothing available in the workplace, friends and family, or they'll look at media, for example. So you can see there that that's a very potentially slanted view in finding something that's suitable to them, because as we all know, 2 people, even on the same salary at the same age, are likely to have very, very different personal financial situations. So what works for one won't necessarily work for another.
Okay, thank you. I'm just going to ask one question from the Slido, which I think you kind of touched upon, but it's kind of the regulation question at the bottom there. So what's the risk to the employer if they start providing advice rather than guidance?
Well, it's never the employer providing that. It will always be the provider, because the employer won't be regulated to do so. And I think in some ways, guidance is a middle ground. Of course it is. But if you ask an employee, many employees who receive guidance will feel they have been advised. And again, it's going back to that term. Advice itself, in many ways, is the safest, absolute safest option, because it is regulated. They have to be competent. They're measured on their training and competency every single day, week, whatever. In good firms, they have compliance teams that oversee every piece of advice that's being given. Every phone call, every WebEx is recorded. There's a lot of sort of governance and structure around advice. That does not exist for guidance. So I think there is still a perception, as I say, for the firms that don't provide it, there is absolutely still a perception that if you're making a recommendation, then if something goes wrong, then you as the employer will take the flak. That's always the case as an employer. That applies to every service you put in front of your employees. But in terms of the quality given, if you've got a regulated advisor that's gone through a selection process, then hopefully you've got the absolute best service that they can give there. And by the way, they don't always have to give advice. So many, certainly my team, my advisors, many of the conversations they have, they say you don't need advice, you just need guidance. And they're the best people to discern the difference between those two, because they're doing it on a daily basis, really. And going back to that other point, some firms that we know get around that worry about recommending an advisor by giving a panel. So you have a panel of 3 or you have a panel of 5. At least then you give your employees choice rather than leaving them to the wolves of the market and finding somebody out of that 16,000.
Very quickly.
Thank you. Yeah. So I work for a large insurance firm, no, large, relative to 9,000 people, and we looked at education coaching and advice, and found education. I guess the issue with that often was that if you front load people with knowledge they don't need at that point, then the half-life is pretty short. After 6 months, they've forgotten all about it, or at least if I'm a good example, that's certainly the case. Then we looked at coaching and advice, and I guess we shied away from that. Seemed a lot more appropriate in terms of that you can make it available when someone needs it. But I guess we shied away mainly on the basis of cost, and just looking at the cost of an individual session of advice because of the insurance, all the good things, the oversight, the quality, it just becomes very, very expensive. So when you showed that funnel earlier of education, coaching, advice, I was just wondering if you had sort of any sense of sort of take up, because I guess it's the end of the funnel that's the most expensive, and then the coaching is a bit more price effective perhaps, and then the education probably can be provided en masse.
It is, absolutely.
At sort of that people can tap, and that's probably the cheapest, so to speak, or most cost effective.
Yeah, but I think if I think sort of, and I'll be extreme to make the point, but if I say 100% of people have education, you're probably only looking at a maximum of 25% taking guidance or coaching, and then you're probably looking at 5 to 9% taking advice. So that's the sort of percentages through that we see anyway in our case. And going back to the price point, there are ways to look at that as well. So some organisations, some financial advice firms will do what's called packaged advice. So if it's limited to a certain thing like finding a mortgage, there will be a set price for that, and it will be a very distinct service. If it's more wide-ranging and has to look at everybody's circumstances and everything to do with everything in their finances, then it will be a higher price. But other firms also do something where they perhaps give a level of funding, and anything beyond that, the employee then funds themselves. So there are lots of ways to address that, I suppose I would say.
Okay, thank you. Unfortunately, we're out of time, so thank you for the questions. There were a couple more in the Slido which we didn't get to, but if you can just thank Jeanette with the traditional method. Thank you.